Welcome to Prospect Journal's International Debate of Star Wars. Today, we have Andy and Micah, and we are debating whether the prequels themselves have racial caricatures in Star Wars film sagas that are offensive and founded on harmful stereotypes, and is it done in good fun, but instead reinforces the stereotypes that the caricatures originate from. Now first, to introduce, we will have Andy.
Hello, I'm Andy, third year, Director of Operations for Prospect, and I'll be arguing on the side that Star Wars does include harmful and offensive stereotypes that are founded on caricatures that harm certain groups in society.
And we have Micah.
Hi, I'm Micah, first-year staff writer at Prospect. And my position is that although Star Wars does have depiction based on old cultures and existing cultures, these are not done in a harmful way. It's a product of a fictional.
So each individual will have 2 minutes to say their opinions, and then from then on we will do questions and rebuttals. And to start out, let's go with Andy.
Very well. Okay, so when you look at the origins of the Jedi, and when George Lucas initially made the Jedi, the term Jedi came from the Arabic word al-Jadi, which means master of the mystic warrior way. However, at the same time, in these movies, especially in the prequels, George Lucas portrays the North African tribesmen and Bedouin Arabs as Tusken raiders that are barbaric and depend on animalistic instincts that attack people without prevail. Similarly, this depiction of the Jedi in these movies is a sort of a Orientalism or fetishization of Asian American culture and Middle Eastern culture. You know, these big Eastern mysticisms of the Force and the Shaolin-like samurai practitioners of the Jedi. It also influences from Sufi mysticism. Similarly, the music that follows Darth Maul in Episode 1 in Phantom Menace is it's supposedly spoken in Sanskrit, you know, kind of giving an alien feel to the movie and to the villain itself. Similarly, in Episode 1, we're introduced to Watto, a Todarian that has large nose, blue, greedy salesman that's a racial caricature of Jewish people that was similarly used to what the Nazis used in the 1930s as the quote-unquote happy merchants. Similarly, the Trade Federation, that are the main antagonists of the film alongside the Darth Maul and the Sith, speak in accents similar to East Asians. You know, they're depicted as complaining unfair trade deals relative to the normal world, which is, you know, the humans in these movies as well. Also, the Gungans. The Gungans in Episode 1, they are also depicted as these bumbling, clumsy individuals that speak in pidgin English that are a quote-unquote primitive race that inevitably saves the day against a technologically advanced race, which is the Trade Federation, a la the noble savage concept. So, what I would argue is that now in the Disney era, to rectify these stereotypes, Star Wars and Disney has endeavored to do performative activism by including more people of color and including, you know, media from Japanese animation culture in Star Wars visions. You know, and then also a new Star Wars Disney saga, there's been the humanization of these Tusken Raiders through the Book of Boba Fett and incorporating Maori culture in this show as well.
All right, that is time. So, we're turning it over to Micah. You ready?
Yeah.
Go.
Okay, so Star Wars takes place in fictional land, and as a result, all characters are being direct derivatives of cultures that have considered differences. The nature of Star Wars is that it is a hero's journey with protagonists and antagonists. As a result, some of the cultures that are based off of are going to be put in a negative light as they are antagonists. And he mentions that the North African cultures or characters based off the North African cultures are going to be in a negative way. And in some instances they are. However, we also see that the Jedi's clones are actually based off the traditional African tribes or whatever. If Star Wars wants to negatively depict those African tribes, they would not have to do well in both positive and negative lights. And so, in my opinion, this is a result of there being positively portrayed people and negatively portrayed people. You talk about the fetishization of Asian people and Asian culture in this series. If Star Wars was just a series that only had Western ideas and cultures, there's an argument that it is exclusive towards other cultures. Overall, I see exclusive because we see that in Star Wars, Palpatine is a name based off old Roman, or derived from Roman languages. But no one talks about how this is negatively portraying Roman people. And we see that the Sith's cloaks are based on Japan. No one talks about how this is depicting or calling back to making a negative effect on Japanese imperialism from back in the 60s. Overall, there's some inconsistencies on what we pick and choose to have issues with. And as a result of the way that the Star Wars series works, if there will be culture that are portrayed in positive ways and negative ways, this is the result of the nature of the story. But none of it is done in malintent, it's just are trying to be inclusive and diversifying the overall existence of their series.
All right. Let those soak in for a few seconds. And while we're thinking about that, Micah, how about you start us off with your questions toward Andy?
So, I guess one thing I'm curious about is why do you think that they? I forget exactly the character that you're talking about. Why do you think they describe some people like traditions as negative, and then have the Star Wars protagonists, people that are always in a positive light, have their focus be North African? Doesn't that create a duality, and whether we're depicting them as positive or negative?
Agreed, it does create duality, but when you look at the characters that are portrayed by the Jedi, they are usually, there's a lack of, people of color with the exception of Mace Windu, but there's also mostly white males that are predominantly, well spoken and well versed, that they are civilized, whereas you have the Tusken Raiders, especially in episode 1, where they're attacking with malicious intent, that they are unreasonable, and as I mentioned before, they are depicted more humanized, quote unquote, in the Book of Boba Fett and subsequent series under Disney, which is a sort of what I would say is performative activism. However, that does not change the fact how they're depicted in the original prequel trilogy. It doesn't change the fact that the Tusken Raiders are seen as barbaric savages that are less than human. You can't even see their faces in a way that dehumanizes them. So, understandably, the Bedouin, as well as the North African tribesman culture, is portrayed in a positive and negative light, but that does not discount the fact that they are treated in such a harsh way, especially in the caricature of the Tusken Raiders.
And
A second question for you is that do you think that depicting the Jedi, or the Sith, as having traditional Japanese clothes is some sort of non-traditional Japanese imperialism, or do you think that that is just a non-correlation?
I would agree with you that it is sort of a knock on Japanese imperialism, because if you see throughout the series, the Sith and then the Empire, especially in the original trilogy, is a representation of hyper-nationalism and militarization of cultures and societies, similar to the Roman Empire and even the Nazis to an extent. However, again, the Sith are not just a knock on to Japanese imperialism, but when you listen to the music that accompanies them, especially Darth Maul as this outwardly alien individual, the music behind it is Sanskrit, as I mentioned before, whereas the music that accompanies all the other characters usually follows a sort of European opera type of sound. When you see, especially in the prequels, when you see the Jedi, it's more music that's more calming and relieving, and it's similar to, as I mentioned before, the music from opera music from Europe.
all right, with those two questions, let's turn over to questions for Andy. Andy, what question you got for Micah?
Very well. So my first question is that you mentioned that yes, that there is the culture and display of the North African tribesmen is painted in a positive and negative light for both groups, especially when it comes to the Jedi and the Tusken Raiders. But I would ask, why? How does that fact that the Jedi are portrayed in a positive light discount the fact that they are embodying a negative stereotype in our society? You forgot to mention that this is a negative stereotype that people have about North African tribesmen and Bedouin Arabs that has led to negative consequences in our present society. Now, I ask you now, what do you believe is the consequences of this in present society, without talking about the Jedi? We're talking about the Tusken Raiders, and
So, what is the effect of this on present society, is what you're asking?
yes,
Ultimately, I think that the effect of this on present society is pretty minimal. As I think it would take a relatively educated person to understand that Tusken Raiders are actually derivative of North African culture, because that's not something that most Western fans, which is the predominant fan base of Star Wars, is familiar with. If someone like you recognizes this, that it is based on negative North African stereotypes, you're probably informed enough to know that these caricatures are demeaning in some ways. However, it's not actually representative of what the cultures are like. And so it would take an educated fan base to recognize these caricatures or caricatures. However, these educated fans will not put these negative ways in a way that an uneducated fan might.
very well.
We have one more question.
Okay. So as you mentioned before, that it was about the Trade Federation, that there has to be an ethnic group that has to get the bad side of the stick in one way or another, and they have to rely on these stereotypes. Again, as I asked before, how does that justify the fact that we are relying on racial characters in society, like racial stereotypes in society, to make evil characters? As I mentioned before, does that not reinforce these characters in our society? If pop culture, especially in Star Wars, depicts these people as evil and that their actions are wrong.
So I would say that this is not the only case of ethnic groups being put in negative lights. For example, the majority of the characters from the Sith, aside from Darth Maul, have very Western appearances, Western appearances and ways of talking. generally speaking, they don't have accents and they're very fluent in English. We can make the argument that this is negatively characterizing Western society, but we don't. Instead, we're choosing to hyperfixate on one example of an ethnic group being portrayed negatively. We get the greater picture where many ethnic groups in Star Wars are being portrayed negatively, and if we hyper-focus on some examples, it'll look bad, but if you look at a greater picture, it's just the way Star Wars is. It has many inspirations from many cultures, and as a result, like I said, it just happened to be that Asian stereotypes are portrayed negatively in this case.
All right. Well, thank you both for your questions, for your insights and input. Now, to remind everyone, each individual argued the opposite of what they originally believed. So take all this with a grain of salt. And again, just as Star Wars is wonderful, all of our opinions can be appreciated and understood. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.